Our God is Able by Basil Miller. A long chain of evidence proclaims today, no less than in the days of Daniel, that the God whom we serve is able. Out of the past, the voice of human experience testifies to this fact. Multitudes at the present who have testified the divine promises assure us that God is able and sufficient for human needs. The truth of God's ability to perform in the realm of our spiritual requirements and wants is as demonstrable as any scientific theory. Daniel tested God, as did also his Hebrew companions, and said, "Our God is able." Moses and David joined their voices with those of kings and priests, no less than with the voice of suffering Job, to swell the anthem for the ages to hear, "Our God is able." Throughout the Old Testament and everywhere in the New, men who walked under the shadow of the Almighty's benedictions proclaim, "Our God is able." Ask Abraham and Paul, and they say, "Our God is able." Samuel and Luke, priest and physician, Joshua and John, commander and spiritual seer, all shouted for the world to hear, "Our God is able." Noble women of sacred writ, Hannah and Deborah, Mary and Martha, having tested God in the crucible of their needs, affirm, "Our God is able." The God of Elijah is no less the God of Wesley and Luther, Livingston, and Carey, the humblest Christian or the greatest saint. God is able to weave a chain of divine providences out of tragedies. Looking upon many events in the lives of Christians, we are prone to say tragedies, but viewing them from the broader side of God's plan, we realize that they are divine providences. When Wesley was preaching the funeral sermon of his friend John Fletcher, he spoke of him as the holiest man into whose face I have ever looked. Reviewing Fletcher's career, we discover a chain of providences which burst from what the youthful John called a tragedy. When Wesley was preaching the funeral sermon of his friend John Fletcher, he spoke of him as the holiest man into whose face I have ever looked. Reviewing Fletcher's career, we discover a chain of providences which burst from a youthful John called a tragedy. John was an adventurous youth who cared little for God, in whose veins the lure of faraway places ran like hot blood. He heard of a buccaneering captain who was outfitting his ship for a gold-searching trip to the New World. John joined the privateer and went to Lisbon, awaiting the time of sailing. One morning he commanded his servant to bring a pot of tea. Blundering fellow that he was, as John then thought, he stumbled as he fetched the pot of boiling tea, and John's leg instead of his mouth got the full effect of the accident. "A tragedy!" cried John, as he waited a month for the leg to heal. In the end, the captain said, "I cannot wait any longer. I am sailing tomorrow without you." As the ship's sails dropped behind the horizon, John's hopes vanished, but that vessel was never heard of again. The tragedy of the boiling tea became the divine providence which produced Wesley's holiest man. Wesley's spiritual awakening, which culminated at Aldersgate, was likewise produced by a tragedy. Riding the Atlantic, the ship which bore Wesley to the New World was caught center in God's storm, and John feared for his life. While he trembled and quaked, he noticed a band of Moravians bravely singing. The greater the waves, the stronger the tempest, the calmer the singers' voices became. John later asked the band's leader, "Were you not afraid?" Out of the answer and the ensuing contact came a chain of providences which led Wesley to Peter Bowler in London, who taught John the way of the Lord more perfectly. Had there been no storm, there might have been no Aldersgate, and no mighty evangelical revival such as God, through John Wesley, produced. Through the lives of the great from century to century, the fact of God's ability to weave providences out of tragedies blazes from the pages of Christian literature and life. What we looked upon as tragedies, if the hand of God is upon our lives, may be providences in disguise. Livingston's mangled shoulder, torn by a lion's teeth, was the one such mark by which his body was identified as that of the great missionary when the salt-preserved and bark-wrapped body was brought by native hands for London burial. God is able to transmute petitions into tragedies. Examples of God's ability to take prayers and materialize them stand as beacons which illuminate the annals of Christian biography. George Mueller entered in his journal this testimony: "During my lifetime, I have had 25,000 prayers answered, and 5,000 of these came on the very day I made the petitions." Mueller kept for his prayer requests a ledger in which was a double diary, a double entry. One side was the nature of the request and the date. to be matched on the other side by the answer and the date on which it came. Checking through his record, this man who read the Bible through 200 times, 100 on his knees, found that 25,000 times God specifically changed his prayers into realities and materialized his petitions. Hudson Taylor, who gave the world the China Inland Mission, in 1887 felt led to ask God for 100 new missionaries on the field during that year. This meant that many thousands of dollars must be provided, through prayer, to carry the added burden. There must be money for outfits, for transportation to China, as well as funds by which these new missionaries could be supported. Taylor began to pray, as did all his friends, "Lord, give us 100 new missionaries this year." God took a hand in the affair. Missionary applicants appeared, and money as well. On December 29th, Taylor made this entry in his diary: "The last of the 200 missionaries sail today for China." The actual facts are these. During that year of prayer, 600 applicants for the China field contacted the board. Many of these were sent to China later, but exactly 100 were sent during 1887, as Taylor and his associates prayed. All the money necessary for transportation, equipment, and support was provided. After 7 years, 78 of the 100, as Taylor called them, were laboring with the China Inland Mission. 5 had died, and most of the others were still missionaries in China, though with different missionary groups. If our God is able to change into realities the prayers of Mueller, Taylor, and thousands of other witnesses, can he not materialize our petitions as we today, in a world of need, bring them to him? God is able to bend insignificant lives into the broad channel of the divine will. Moody expressed this sentiment in a thought which occurred to him while he was walking on a New York City street. The world has never yet seen what God can do through a man wholly consecrated to him. Moody's answer to the soul-challenging thought was, "Lord, I will be that man." Before he was through with the soul winner, God had taken the man who had been a needy orphan, farmed out by his mother for board and bed, a shoe clerk, won to Christ by a shoe salesman, crazy Moody, superintending a Chicago Sunday school of 2,000, which he had built in a stammering, stuttering way from 38 Chicago ruffians whom he had hired to attend his first Sunday school class, pastor of the Moody Tabernacle in Chicago and world evangelist, and bent him into the divine will. Moody testified that before his career ended, he had prayed individually with 75,000 souls in his meetings, and had won, it was estimated, 1,000,000 to the master. The bending process put Moody into the swing of the divine current, where God's power, and not the evangelist's human ability, was the source of his soul winning. Evan Robert was a Welsh coal miner who one day felt the call of God heavy upon his soul. He began praying one prayer, which he repeated daily wherever he was for 18 months. "Bend me, O Lord, or break me. Bend me, O Lord, or break me." Down in the mines, as he dug the coal, he lifted this petition. Throughout the long hours of the night, he cried, "Bend me, O Lord, or break me." At the end of 18 months, God bent the Welsh miner into the channel of the divine will, touched him with power from on high, put words of glory into his heavy-tongued mouth, and made of him the leader in the Welsh revival early in this century. The bending process whereby Robert could be placed in the channel of God's will was required to make him other than a coal miner. The men and women whom God uses to his glory and to carry his message into daily spheres of life are those who have been bent into this channel of his will. Finney was a lawyer, but God bent him into this divine-willed channel of work, and he became America's greatest winner of men. So, will God bend you into the channel of his will? If with Robert you will pray, "Bend me, O Lord, or break me," or with Moody will say, "I will be that man thoroughly consecrated to God." God's call for lives through whom he can work is today as powerful as ever.